In the last tutorial, we looked at allocating all of our ideas into our 3 different body paragraphs so that we were covering everything that we wanted to talk about in our essay for 1984. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at some specific questions, and we're going to look at how we can tailor what we've planned to actually answer the question. Because what a lot of students will do is they'll have a pre-prepared essay, they'll get a question, and they'll a lot of the time students pretty much disregard the specifics of the question and write the essay that they want to write without actually tailoring it to the specifics of the question. So we're going to look at how we can go about creating a thesis and then using that to shape and just make minor adjustments to what we've planned so that we're responding in a really definitive way. So the first thing we have to talk about is what a thesis is. What is a thesis? Well, a thesis is your line of argument. It's like your line of argument in a debate. And essentially what its aim is to give you a cohesive argument that runs the whole way through. It gives you a single, or sometimes two, but a clear focus on answering that question and making sure that the examples and the ideas in your paragraphs actually answer the question. And so this is completely different to an introduction. So the thesis is a short, succinct statement that's going to give you your focus, whereas an introduction is an introduction that outlines and introduces the ideas you're going to talk about in more detail. Okay, some people get caught up in creating a thesis. They're in the exam and they think that they have to write 10-line thesis. Well, 1 to 2 sentences is all you need. You want to be able to do it quickly, so then you have that focus, and then you can get in and start writing. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this model of identify, define, and find. Okay, and we'll have a look at that in a second. I think that what is important is to consider, well, in my prepared response, in the thing that I've written already, my argument that I'm arguing throughout is that all warns readers of the dangers of controlling political narratives and their consequence to humanity. So the dangers of controlling political narratives is the totalitarian regime and their reign of terror and their use of fear and suppression, etc. And the consequences to humanity are the absence of love, connection and freedom, and that causes rebellion. So that's what I want to argue in my essays, and then what I want to do is I want to be able to sort of be saying that, but answering the question that's set for me as well. If you have an argument like that and you set that up, you should be able to mould it to any question that they ask. Okay, so we've got a question here, the 2019 HSC. To what extent does the exploration of 1984 invite you to reconsider your understanding of loneliness? So the first thing we're going to do is identify the keywords. You'll also notice when you're writing your essay, you have to write 1984 like that in the first instance and underline it, and then after that, still underline it, but you can abbreviate to that. Just go with what your teacher tells you to do in that sense. But I'm not writing an essay, so I'm just going to use 1984 like this all the time. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify the keywords in the question. Okay, all of the questions have something like to what extent or how successful or, you know, that type of thing. Okay, so, and we know the exploration of 1984 is to do with the ideas that it's exploring. But I think this word invite is an important word. I also think reconsider is something that's quite central to the text and the human experience module and the rubric, and then your understanding of loneliness. Now, I think the most important word here is loneliness, but we need to look at these notions as well. Okay, so I think that first and foremost you have to look at these things and you know, jot down what you think they mean. So if we start with invite, and we look in, basically I think it's saying that 1984 welcomes, encourages, invites readers into an exaggerated world, and he shares that story. Okay, and the story of Oceana and Winston Smith is a representation of Orwell's world. So, the storytelling. This is focusing on storytelling, creating a world. So he's inviting the reader into that. What have we got next? We've got, I'm going to do loneliness second. So we're invited into this world of loneliness, or the world of the lonely characters. And so if we look at now sort of what we're doing is, I forgot to say, is we're defining, we're teasing out what these words mean. So with loneliness, we're talking about, in the novel, it's about isolation, so that the controlling political narrative isolates individuals. Loneliness also relates to having no experience of love or connection, or sense of belonging, that type of thing. No connection. And so it's looking at the this story has created a world in which, it has a controlling political narrative, then the end product is the isolation of the individual. It creates loneliness. And then we're saying reconsider, and I think reconsider is a word that will come up quite a bit in the essay questions that you're given, because once you've explored and come to an understanding of Winston's loneliness and his desire to rebel because all he wants is love, and the outcome of the novel, what it does is it makes you reconsider the importance of being aware of controlling political narratives in your own world, because there is a tendency of the political narrative to be at odds with the desires of humanity, this idea of love and happiness and connection and belonging, etc., etc. So I think reconsider is a really important word as well, because it's challenging readers. And I'll just put challenging readers to question the impact of political ideology on our humanity. Okay, so once we've sort of defined those keywords, now what we want to do is find a way that we can put these all together, find a way to shape our argument. Okay, in this question, essentially, we're only having one true focus. We're exploring loneliness so that we can reconsider the impact of controlling political narratives on humanity. But sometimes there will be two key ideas or two parts to the question, and you have to find a way to be able to talk about both parts of the question, but we don't have to in this one. So my thesis for this question would be something like: the novel 1984 successfully explores the dangers of controlling political narratives on our fundamental human desire for love and connection. The isolation experienced by Winston challenges readers to question the impact of political ideology on our humanity. Okay, so that's my focus. I've narrowed it down. I've kept it to 2 sentences. It's probably a little bit longer than I would want in an exam situation, but that's a long way off for you. You're working towards that. But essentially, now you have a platform to be able to talk about this. And you'll notice that when I was identifying and defining these words, I was referring to my overarching argument. I'm bringing it back to that all the time. Okay, let's have a look at the next question. So the 2020 HSC question is: how effectively does 1984 tell stories to reveal the personal and shared nature of human experience? Okay, so once again, to what extent? This one's how effectively. So we know that's going to be part of the question. You always have to assess how effective they are, so we don't need to explore that. In this one, we're going to look at tell stories. I think is an important little phrase. Obviously the word reveal, and then the personal and shared nature. So we have to make some sort of connection between the personal and shared. Now, it's interesting, isn't it, here, we really do need to be specific and say what the human experience is, the personal shared nature of human experience. Human experience is such a rubbery term that you don't want to use that as a statement in your essays. What you want to do is be able to say what the human experience is. And so that might be this notion of loneliness that Winston experiences, or it might be this idea of the controlling political narratives and the consequences they have, on our desire for love, connection and freedom. So we want to make sure that we're being specific and we don't use big general statements like human experience. I mean, everything that a human encounters, you and I encounter, is an experience, isn't it? So we want to be specific and talk about what it is. So that might be the novel is looking at rebellion or the desire for love, that Winston and Julia have. Okay, so we've identified our keywords, and so what we will do is we'll say, rather than I write them all down, telling stories. So all shares a story about our world. I might write it down. Tell stories. Story of our world. And then we get to reveal. So he shares a story of our world to expose the dangers. So instead of using the word reveal, I'm saying that they're exposing. I'm defining it as that's what it's revealing. Expose the dangers of controlling political narratives. So here I'm going straight up to my overarching argument again, and then we've got the personal and shared, and so there we're pretty much saying that Winston's personal experience represents the collective experience. And I want to use that term representation. Okay, so this question's quite different to the 2019 HSC, but we can still argue the same thing, can't we? So my thesis statement for this one would be something like, 1984 successfully shares the story of an individual's experience to expose the dangers of controlling political narratives. By representing Winston's personal story as the collective experience, Orwell successfully warns readers of the danger of losing our humanity. So I'm arguing the same thing that I was arguing in the last question, but I'm just tailoring it so that it's specific. I'm not talking about loneliness in this one, am I? It's more about this representation, and I think that's really what this is getting you to focus on in this question. Okay, let's have a look at one more question. This third question is different to the first two in the sense that it has a quote, it has a reference to something else, and then the question is underneath it. So obviously what you have to do is you have to deal with the quote that's given to you. That's going to drive the argument. There are ideas in there that they want you to explore, and then you have to answer the question. Okay, so when we look at that question, Orwell's iconic dystopian text, 1984, has been referred to as a cautionary tale. That's the quote. And then the question, to what extent does your reading support this assessment? So once again, we've got to what extent, so you have to qualify that, and we've talked about that just before. So when we look at these, well, we know the novel is iconic because it's been around for a very long time and it's one of the world's most popular texts. So let's go with this dystopian. I think that's a key word. Has been referred to as a cautionary tale. We need to deal with that and define what that is. And then from the question, to what extent does your reading support this assessment? I think we just need to define and clarify that as well. Okay, so when we're talking about dystopian, a dystopian text, that really allows you to start talking about speculative fiction. So Orwell employs the genre of speculative fiction. I'll just write like that. Okay. More importantly, we've got the cautionary tale. And certainly the way I'm going to define that is that the novel is a warning. That's really what it's saying. So the dystopian story is a warning to readers. So that's inviting you to focus on the impact on the reader. And what's the warning about? Well, obviously it's about the controlling political narratives and their consequences to humanity. Okay, so there we go, we're straight back into that. And then we've got this word assessment. And it's not talking about an assessment task in this scenario. It's more, to what extent does your reading support this point of view or this statement? Okay, so I'll just put statement. So I think it's just important for you to say, okay, they're not talking about my assessment, they're actually talking about this quote up here. So the question is asking you to deal with that quote. Alright, so it's quite trivial. These are the two things, but the most important thing is this cautionary tale, but it's asking you to talk about genre. How does Orwell use the genre of dystopian or speculative fiction to warn, to create a cautionary tale? What is the cautionary tale? Well, it's about this again, isn't it? So my thesis for this one would be, Orwell successfully explores the dangers of controlling political narratives through the genre of speculative fiction. His choice of genre both warns readers and challenges them to consider the perils of political ideology in their world. So it's excellent. To what extent? Well, I agree with it totally, and not only does it, is it apparent in the novel, but it challenges readers to apply that to their own world. And so there we go, we're back to the overarching argument. Okay, now just to finish off, my final thing that I want to say to you is just to reinforce this idea that this is about developing a way to address the question. If you don't address the question and you just write your standard essay, and it's good, you're going to get a strong B. You're not going to have any personal voice and you're not going to be answering the question. So we're developing a thesis that then we can go ahead and we can write an introduction, and then we can get in and write our body paragraphs. All the while, we've got this thesis statement. So if you're in an exam, you read the question, you identify the words, and write your 1 or 2 sentences. So you've got that in front of you, and then in every paragraph that you write, you want to be making sure that you're making reference to and you're answering the question specifically. And finally, all that's left to do now is for you to go and do it. You have to write. The only way that you're going to get good at this is by experiencing. So you've heard all the theory, you've seen me do some, but until you actually apply it and you actually, and you get in and write and you look at other questions and you consider how you would address them and create theses for them, then you're going to find a lot of benefit from the actual doing of it. So get in there and good luck.